The lights didn't just rise, they struck, bold and blistering like the start of a trial. The views set felt less like morning television and more like a tribunal. There was no laughter, no polite applause, just a hush that spread like smoke. Oprah Winfrey stepped into the studio with a presence that didn't need an introduction. Her black pantsuit was elegant but not flashy. Her walk, slow, deliberate, radiated the calm of someone who had already buried too many battles to tremble in a new one. Her eyes scanned the audience. They didn't blink. She sat down like a judge entering a courtroom, not to argue but to weigh truth. Across from her sat Candace Owens, youthful, poised, sharp as a scalpel. Her arms folded tightly across her lap, jaw set like granite. She didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't offer pleasantries. To her, this wasn't a conversation. This was conquest. Whoopi Goldberg leaned into the mic, her voice unusually subdued. "Ladies, welcome. Let's begin." The silence that followed was electric. Candace struck first. Her tone was clipped, professional but soaked in provocation. "Let's be honest, Oprah. You built your career making black women cry on camera. You turned suffering into brand equity. And now, you sit here pretending to be the voice of empowerment?" Gasps flickered through the audience, not from surprise, from disbelief that it had started that fast, that hard. Oprah's face didn't move. She looked at Candace the way a monument might regard a pebble. "I gave people space to speak their truth," she said quietly. "That's not exploitation, that's humanity." Candace leaned in. "No, that's performance. You sold pain, branded it, profited from it." Oprah's voice didn't rise. It sank deeper. "I sold survival. I didn't invent the pain. I refused to look away from it." Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat. Joy Behar pressed her lips together. Even Alyssa Farah Griffin, often the loudest on policy, stayed silent. Oprah continued, "I've sat with women who were molested by their stepfathers, boys who saw their brothers shot in front of them, survivors of things no child should endure. And what I gave them was dignity." Candace's eyes narrowed. "You call that dignity or ratings?" The tension coiled tighter. Oprah leaned forward, her voice now almost a whisper. "You confuse truth-telling with victimhood. But telling, the truth is not weakness. It's what kept our grandmothers alive." A slow murmur crept through the audience. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Candace straightened her spine. "You've made an entire generation feel broken. I'm here to tell them they're not." Oprah didn't flinch. "That's the difference between us. I see the wound and say, you can heal. You pretend the wound never existed." The studio was silent, except for the low hum of the lights overhead. This was no interview. It was a reckoning, and America was watching. Breath held, camera, rolling, phones ready, as two black women sat on one stage, with no mercy to spare. Oprah's hands rested softly in her lap. Her expression didn't waver. She didn't meet Candace's fire with flame. She met it with centuries of smoke and scar tissue. Her voice, when it came, was not dramatic. It was precise, weighted, heavy like soil. "My grandmother was born in Mississippi in 1900. She scrubbed the floors of white people's homes and prayed on knees that never stopped aching. She used to tell me, 'Baby, learn to iron so you can get you some good white folks to work for.' That was her highest hope for me. Not freedom, not college, just decent white folks." The room fell into total silence. "I was born into a world that didn't expect me to be anything more than invisible," Oprah continued. "I didn't learn victimhood. I learned silence. I learned how to smile through it, how to disappear in a room to keep myself safe." Candace's face remained unreadable, but her crossed arms shifted slightly as if something, even if just discomfort, had stirred. Oprah turned to the audience, her gaze sweeping across the faces, watching her like a preacher addressing a broken congregation. "People like to talk about the success now, the billionaire, the network, the homes. But that came after every system tried to tell me I wasn't good enough. When I got my first job in television, a white news director told me my nose was too wide, my hair too thick, my voice too black. And still, I stayed, because I wanted to tell stories that weren't being told. She looked back at Candace now, not with malice, but something closer to sorrow. You say I built a brand on black pain, but I built it on truth, on giving a platform to women who were molested and told to stay silent, on boys who were criminalized before they ever turned 12, on mothers who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford diapers. You don't call that pain. I call that America. Candace scoffed quietly. That's still not an excuse to build a victim complex. Oprah didn't look away. You think calling something what it is makes it a complex? I call that survival. I call that history. Sunny finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. There's a difference between glorifying pain and bearing witness to it. Oprah nodded. Exactly. I never told people to stay in their pain. I told them, you're not alone in it. That's not weakness. That's medicine. Joy leaned forward, her voice softer than usual. Do you think people still need that? Oprah didn't hesitate. Yes, because too many people still believe the lie that they're broken, when what they really are is unhealed. She turned back to Candace. And when you call their pain irrelevant, you don't sound like a leader. You sound like someone who forgot how hard it was to become visible. No one clapped. No one dared, because that didn't sound like a response. It sounded like a verdict. Candace Owens didn't flinch. Not during Oprah's story. Not during the room's silence. She waited until the applause threatened to build, then cut into it with surgical timing. You speak well, Oprah. You always have. But that's part of the problem. Pain dressed up in poetry is still pain, and you've taught people that their trauma is a personality trait. A few heads turned, eyebrows raised. She continued, undeterred. I'm not here to diminish your experience. I'm here to say it shouldn't be the blueprint. You act like you broke barriers, and maybe you did. But instead of building ladders, you built a mirror. You made everyone stare at the wound over and over for decades. She reached down and pulled a few printed sheets from a leather folder on her lap. I didn't come unprepared, she said, coolly. Let's talk numbers. 70% of black children are born to single mothers. Violent crime rates in urban neighborhoods, still off the charts. School dropouts, sky high. But do we talk solutions? No. We talk about healing and narratives. We talk about centering pain. Joy shifted uncomfortably. Sunny's eyes narrowed. Candace glanced toward the audience, then back at Oprah. You built an empire on therapy talk, on victimhood as virtue. You taught people that saying I'm not okay was enough, that it deserved applause, but you never told them how to fix it. You never told them how to build. Oprah's hand stayed still, but her eyes flickered, not with anger, but recognition. Candace was playing prosecutor now, fast, brutal, and deliberate. You want to talk about what you gave people? You gave them tears on camera. 1994, the gang intervention episode. Boys crying on stage while you held their hands and told them they were loved. That was beautiful television. But what came next? What program did you fund? What policy did you challenge? The room held its breath. Oprah spoke softly. I gave them what no one else would. A moment of dignity. Candace didn't miss a beat. You gave them a moment, then you moved on. Like trauma tourism. You visited pain, you didn't fix it. A wave of murmurs ran through the crowd. Not cheers, not outrage, just discomfort. Candace's words were precise, but sharp enough to cut empathy at the root. Sunny broke the silence. Candace, are you saying systemic oppression doesn't exist? Candace leaned back in her chair, a small smile creeping in. I'm saying it doesn't define you unless you let it. I'm saying the most powerful thing a black child can hear isn't, it's not your fault. It's, you are not a victim. Oprah exhaled deeply. And what happens to the ones who are? Candace looked away for a moment. Just a flicker. They adapt, or they don't. Oprah's voice darkened. So we leave the broken behind? Candace's smile faded. We stop pretending they're broken. That's how we move forward. The table fell silent again. But now it wasn't reverence. It was recoil. And the audience? Divided. Tense. This wasn't just a debate anymore. This was a battle for the soul of the story itself. Oprah turned slightly in her chair, not toward Candace, but toward the audience, as if addressing something older, deeper, larger than the conversation itself. I've held mothers whose children were shot walking home from school. I've sat on the edge of twin-sized beds in shelters while women told me they couldn't afford diapers. I've stood beside grandmothers who are raising a second generation of orphans, not because their kids died, but because the system swallowed them. Candace crossed her legs tightly. And whose fault is that, Oprah? The government, the system, or the culture that refuses to take responsibility? Oprah's voice didn't rise. If anything, it softened, which only made it more cutting. Built schools in South Africa for girls nobody else would invest in. I've sent hundreds of young women to college who were told they weren't worth the tuition. What have you built, Candace? Candace raised an eyebrow, defensive but calculating. I built a movement. I've helped young black conservatives realize they don't have to choose victimhood to be proud of who they are. Sunny interjected. Her tone was firmer now, her patience thinning. Candace, your child lives in a gated neighborhood. You don't have to worry about his bus stop, or if he'll get pulled over on the way to a friend's house. Candace didn't blink. Because I made the right choices. Oprah's expression turned solemn. She leaned forward. You're raising a black son, Candace, and one day he'll come home with a story. Maybe it'll be about a cop, maybe a teacher, maybe a, look, he got in a store, and you'll want to believe it was all just a misunderstanding. But deep down you'll feel it. The fear, the anger, the disbelief, and you'll remember what you denied here today. Candace's jaw clenched. My son will be prepared. Because I'm teaching him strength. Oprah didn't hesitate. So did my mother, and still I came home crying more times than I can count. There was no shouting, no fire. Just two women speaking from parallel truths, one shaped by legacy, the other by rebellion. Joy Behar finally leaned in. Isn't this what it comes down to? Who our kids become, and whether they inherit our truth or our delusions? Audience murmured in agreement. You could feel it, a collective exhale of mothers watching at home, clutching coffee mugs a little tighter. Oprah looked toward the camera now. I don't speak to argue. I speak because I promised a girl once. A girl with bruises under her sleeves and dreams she couldn't tell anyone. That I'd never let people forget her story. Candace folded her hands. We can't build the future while dragging the ghosts of the past. Oprah's reply was quiet but thunderous. Some ghosts still bleed. And with that, the courtroom cracked open wider, not with evidence, but with emotion. Because now it wasn't just about who was right. It was about whose children would pay the price. The studio lights felt harsher now, like spotlights in an interrogation room. Even the air seemed heavier. Something had shifted. The view no longer felt like television. It felt like trial. And Whoopi Goldberg, long the maternal center of the show, had been silent long enough. She sat up slowly, her eyes moving from Oprah to Candace and back again. Her voice, when it came, was measured, but laced with a kind of generational weariness. I've watched this country swing between pretending it's healed and pretending it never hurt, she said. But what I'm not going to do is sit here and let us rewrite history just because it makes people uncomfortable. Candace turned toward her. Are you calling me dishonest? Whoopi didn't flinch. I'm saying there's a difference between being provocative and being dangerous. The audience stilled. Even the sound crew leaned closer. Whoopi's voice rose slightly. You say we're free, that we've arrived, but free where, Candace, at what cost? You sit at the table of men who would have never let your grandmother through the front door. Candace's voice was sharp. And yet, I'm here. Isn't that proof the door's open? Whoopi leaned in. No. It means you think it's open because you got through. But behind you? It's still locked for millions. Oprah nodded slightly. Sunny folded her arms, watching Candace closely now. Candace's tone shifted, still confident, but now edged with defensiveness. I don't owe my life to pity. I worked hard. I earned my seat. Whoopi's eyes narrowed. And you don't think Harriet worked hard? You think Rosa didn't? You think the mothers in East Baltimore working triple shifts don't earn their lives? This is bigger than your story, Candace. Joy Behar jumped in, trying to ease the rising tension. We can't ignore that some people watching at home feel empowered by what Candace is saying. Whoopi cut her off. Empowerment doesn't come from pretending oppression is over. It comes from fighting it until it actually is. The studio audience erupted in cautious applause. Not the usual, midday clapping, but something deeper. Applause filled with memory, frustration, and maybe even guilt. Candace shifted in her chair. So no one's allowed to think differently? Sunny answered this time, her voice clipped. You're allowed to think. But when your thinking becomes a shield for the people who write laws to erase our history, don't act surprised when we push back. Oprah sat quietly through it all, her eyes fixed on Candace like a teacher waiting for a student to understand her own lesson. Then she said gently, You keep talking about freedom, Candace. But freedom without memory is just amnesia. Candace offered no reply, because now even she could feel it. The courtroom had formed around her, and she was no longer the star witness. She was the one under cross-examination. Candace leaned, back in her chair, a measured calm masking the intensity behind her eyes. This was her arena now. Economics, personal responsibility, the sacred gospel of capitalism she wielded like a shield. Look, she began, voice firm. I did what Oprah suggests can't be done. I pulled myself up, built a life, raised a child, thrived. And if I can do it, so can anyone. We don't need victim narratives, we need agency. Oprah's gaze didn't waver. Agency doesn't exist in a vacuum, she said softly. You're lucky you could walk into a world that already had doors open for you. But there are millions who face walls with no handles, locked by policy, poverty, and prejudice. Candace's lips tightened. Then don't blame others for your choices. Stop looking backward, look forward, build, create. Own your success. Sunny Hostin leaned in. Candace, you're talking about individual success, but what about systemic barriers? Redlining, generational poverty, access to quality education? Those aren't choices you can just will away. Candace waved a hand dismissively. Systems are made by people. People can change systems. Personal responsibility works. Oprah's voice grew firmer. And yet you ignore how those systems crush those without privilege to navigate them. You speak of capitalism like it's colorblind, but history proves otherwise. You want to talk numbers? Look at black home ownership, wealth gaps, unemployment rates. Don't tell me opportunity is equal when the ladder is missing rungs. Candace shifted uncomfortably but maintained her composure. I'm not ignoring the struggle. I'm saying we shouldn't idolize the struggle. Stop telling people they're helpless because of history. Help them understand their potential. Oprah leaned forward, her hands clasped, eyes piercing. Potential doesn't matter if the world is built to ignore it. You think telling a child you can succeed changes a neighborhood that's been stripped of resources? No, you have to fight with them, not lecture at them. The audience stirred. Phones recorded. A low murmur rippled through the studio, punctuating the ideological clash. Candace's voice rose slightly. I'm empowering them to fight themselves, to see the opportunity in the chaos. Oprah's reply was measured, but devastating. Opportunity isn't chaos. Opportunity is created. And when you pretend there's no system to dismantle, you make excuses for everyone but yourself. Joy Behar leaned back, exhaling. The room's tense enough to break a knife. Oprah's eyes softened momentarily. Candace, I survived, because I changed the rules in my favor. But I didn't pretend the rules didn't exist. That's what makes the difference between survival and thriving. Candace's jaw tightened. Her capitalism sermon had been confident, precise, rehearsed. But against the weight of lived history and moral authority, Her arguments began to wobble. For the first time, the audience sensed the cracks. Not in Candace's logic, she still had words, but in the illusion that sheer willpower alone could erase centuries of structural inequity. Oprah didn't need to raise her voice. She just let the truth linger. And in that silence, the battlefield shifted, from ideology to reality. The air in the studio grew heavier. The light seemed colder, harsher, like a witness box spotlight tracing every line on Oprah's face. For over an hour, the ideological duel had raged. Statistics, slogans, moral posturing. But now, Oprah's strategy shifted. Not logic, not rhetoric. Emotion, experience, pain. She leaned forward, voice low, measured, intimate, as though speaking directly to each viewer in the room. "I want to tell you a story," she began. "A girl I met years ago in Chicago, 16, bright, full of dreams. Her mother worked 2 jobs. She slept in a small apartment with peeling paint and a crack in the ceiling that let in the rain. She was brilliant. She had hope. She believed in tomorrow." Candace's posture stiffened. She crossed her arms again, bracing. "And?" she asked sharply. Oprah's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "She was found dead at 17, shot during a drive-by. I couldn't save her. None of us could. And every day since, I've carried the weight of that failure with me. Not because I caused it, but because I witnessed it." The studio fell silent. Even the hum of cameras seemed muted. Every breath felt heavy, charged with the gravity of what Oprah had said. This wasn't political rhetoric. This was history lived and bleeding into the present. "You talk about personal responsibility, Candace," Oprah continued, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "And I do not deny it. But responsibility without resources, without access, without safety, it's a cruel illusion. You can tell a child to succeed, but if their neighborhood, their school, their world is a battlefield, the words mean nothing." Candace's jaw clenched. "That's tragedy, not policy," she said, her voice sharp but quieter now. The rehearsed slogans and statistics felt hollow in the face of real grief. Oprah's gaze cut through her like sunlight through glass. "Tragedy is policy when you ignore it. When budgets are slashed. When children die quietly in alleys and classrooms while adults debate ideology on camera. That is policy, Candace, and it costs lives." Sunny shifted in her seat, soft but firm. "You're showing her what the numbers can't," she said, nodding toward Oprah. "The human cost." Oprah exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle like dust over broken windows. "I didn't tell her story for sympathy. I told it because someone has to remember. Because someone has to feel the weight so that others might act differently. Because ignoring it does not erase it." Candace's carefully rehearsed defenses faltered. Her hands gripped her lap. For the first time, she hesitated. Words of deflection, slogans of empowerment, all of it seemed inconsequential against lived suffering. Oprah leaned back, voice softening but sharpening with moral clarity. "I have met mothers whose sons were killed in traffic stops, teachers whose students were lost to gangs, children trapped in cycles no pep talk can break. I've met them all, and I speak for them because the system will not. And you, Candace, cannot legislate empathy or erase history." A hush fell over the audience. Phones hovered mid-air, recording, capturing the moment that felt less like television and more like a reckoning. Even the camera operators paused, careful not to miss a second of the gravity unfolding. Candace's eyes darted briefly to Oprah, then away. I still believe in agency," she murmured. But even she sounded smaller, diminished by the weight of pain she could not quantify or debate. Oprah's voice rose gently, carrying both sorrow and authority. "Agency without justice is hollow. Freedom without memory is fragile. And hope without truth is empty." The room remained silent, the tension palpable. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was testimony. Pain as proof. The human cost of policies ignored, promises broken, futures stolen. Candace had data. Oprah had names, faces, and the haunting echo of lives lost. And in that contrast, the audience felt it, the moral clarity that no slogan, no chart, no clever quip could match. And, in that quiet, Oprah had won the first true victory of the night. The hearts of everyone in the room were listening.